Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast, Christine on Easton. I'm your host, Christine, and on this episode, I'm going to talk about limerence, subject of limerence. I'm not sure if you've heard of that before. Prior to me learning about limerence, I had never heard that term before, but we're going to get into it today. Okay, so the name of her channel is Crappy Childhood Fairy. Okay, and her name is Anna Runkle. Okay, so that's who she is, and her content is about teaching people to recognize how to heal symptoms of complex PTSD, or CPTSD, might be referred to that as well. So her work is focused on overcoming childhood abuse and neglect. And so sometimes you'll hear her use the term childhood PTSD. Now, she's not a doctor or a therapist, but that doesn't mean that someone isn't an expert on how to overcome certain things that you might deal with in life. So definitely check her out. But I'm discussing that based on one of her videos that I watched about limerence, and she goes into depth about that. So what is limerence? Limerence is a state of mind resulting from romantic feelings for another person. It could typically involve like intrusive and like sad thoughts or tragic concerns for the object of your affection, your obsession, along with your desire for just receiving that validation of that person's feelings to form a relationship. So, that could look like someone who maybe showed you an act of kindness, and then you just overthink it and you think that it's more than what it is in actuality. Some people might suffer from that, from childhood neglect, and it's just become an obsession for them. And the way you'll be able to tell the difference between love and limerence, a lot of times when someone suffers from that, they might think that they're one and the same, and it might feel the same. I don't know. I've never been in love, so I don't know. But I did some research, and what I found out is that while love and limerence can feel similar, there are a few key differences that separate them. So love, a few factors of that would be built on meaningful connection. You solve problems together. You understand their flaws and love them anyway. And you comfort them, and, it's a balanced relationship. Also, for starters, you're in a relationship. Okay? Limerence is one-sided. You believe the other person can solve your problems. You put them on a pedestal and believe they're flawless. And lastly, you're obsessive and stressful. So that is one way you can recognize, like, hey, this isn't love. Like, I'm just really like fantasizing about this person, and this is limerence. Or, this thing. Because although most of the articles that I've found are about like being obsessive or limerent on a person, I feel like you can apply that to certain things as well. Like maybe fantasizing about your life, like playing it up, but I'm sure that means something else. But playing up your life or a certain situation for yourself or circumstance. So that could be it. It can also be like, some people might categorize it as puppy love or obsessive love. So moving on. Now that we have discussed what limerence is and what it is not, what people might think it is. They might think it's love. Okay. Let's just tap into a little bit about what healthy love versus addicted love is. So with healthy love, again, you're in a relationship. Okay. You are most likely monogamous, and you have committed to each other, and you both feel whole as individuals before you're in a relationship. You both acknowledge red flags early on. The relationship is rooted in shared goals and beliefs. You don't try to put quotes around fix each other. Your boundaries are clear and respected, even including sex. And you feel valued and heard by this person, your partner, your spouse, whoever they are. And the relationship is built on stability. So now let's talk about some of the signs of addicted love. You feel empty, alone, and unfulfilled when you were looking for a relationship. You ignore red flags out of fear of being alone. Relationships are based on feelings and desires. You use one another to heal old wounds. Boundaries are vague. Sex is used to create closeness. Let's put quotes around closeness. And being in a relationship, you feel that it equals self-worth. You're basing your self-worth on being in a relationship. So if you're not in a relationship, you feel like you're not worthy. And that's simply not true. It's just not the case. So the relationship is built on compulsion and need. That is the difference between a healthy love and an addicted love, or limerence, as we are discussing. Now, who's prone to being limerent or suffering from limerence? I feel like it's someone who suffers from OCD, but again, from my research, they're not saying that is the case. Anyone can experience limerence, but some people are more likely to be prone to it. And based on my research, this is what they say: an insecure attachment style. And just to mention, like, they don't even talk about OCD at all, but I would feel like that would fit in because that person is like obsessive and they get fixated on things and people and situations, but it doesn't mention that, at least this particular research. But for the insecure attachment style, so these are people with insecure attachment styles who may be more anxious and preoccupied with relationships and have a stronger need for approval and validation. Another person who could be affected by that is someone suffering from low self-esteem. So low self-esteem and a fear of rejection can make it difficult to establish and maintain healthy boundaries in a relationship. It could also be someone who has unmet emotional needs. People who have unmet emotional needs may be more prone to limerence. Trauma or other life events. People who have experienced trauma or other life stressors that may be more prone to limerence. Developmental issues, which, before we get into that a little bit, like, I feel like, yeah, someone with non-visible disabilities can definitely suffer from that because they're just not balanced. So people who have experienced developmental issues, especially in childhood, may be more prone to limerence. You also can be more prone to limerence if you haven't been sleeping very well and you're sleep deprived. So a lack of sleep or stimulation. Stimulation, like maybe you're on the spectrum, neurodivergent, and you need to be stimulated. So you're going into this fantasy world of being limerent on whatever it is that you're being limerent on, but you're using that for stimulation. So people who are exhausted or you're drained from a lack of sleep or stimulation, again, you can experience limerence. Limerence, again, is an intense longing for another person that can feel like you're madly in love with this person. And for some people, it might last a couple of weeks. And for some people, it's a little more extreme and it's going to last them a lifetime. But I feel like for most people, it's probably just like a couple of weeks. I think if it were to last like a lifetime, like it might be a symptom of something more serious. Like, I don't know, like just a mental issue. Um, Maybe again, like I said, OCD or, maybe even schizophrenic because you're imagining things that just simply aren't true. So how do we deal with that if you feel like you do have that problem? Dealing with limerence it can be hard, but there are things you can do to manage it. You can start by tracking the time spent on certain rituals that you have and thoughts about the object of your affection, whatever it may be. And try to resist these rituals and challenge any irrational thoughts you may have about the person. So the more I research this, it's definitely about a person. And the other examples that I'm talking about, it's not about a person. I mean, it's not about a person. So that therefore it wouldn't be limerence. But in this case, being limerent is a person. So instead, you should focus on developing new habits and activities that can provide a sense of fulfillment and distract you from limerent thoughts. I feel like that's where it's coming from. Your lack of direction, your lack of vision for your life. This is a time where you need to almost become obsessed with yourself and your life and do a life audit, figuring out, how do I envision living my life? What do I want to do with my time? How would I like to spend my time? And how am I currently spending my time? And when you establish that, make out your goals, what you want to do, and work on that and get busy, a lot of these things would stop. You'll shift your focus. It's also important to monitor your progress and adjust your coping strategies as needed to effectively manage limerence and improve your emotional well-being. Also, of course, as I always advise, going to therapy, journaling about it so that you can fight against that, because it's just not healthy. And you don't want to focus on someone who's not focused on you and someone who's not making any impact on your life. They're not important. They're a non-factor. They're not contributing to the higher good of your life. So you need to stop focusing on that person. It's weird. It's weird. And people can sort of like feel when you are feeling that way toward them. And it's also based on just attaching false narratives to a person. They might do certain things and then you start to feel like maybe they're a certain way. And in actuality, they're not that person. You don't know them at all. You have to keep that in mind too. You don't know this person and you're basing it on things that you just don't know about them. Basing it on things that you have created, your perspective, the way you feel that you experience them. And it might not be true at all. Most of the time it's not. So, it's just fantasy and imagination, pretty much. And a tendency toward fantasy imagination may play a role in development and maintenance of limerence, and create these idealized images of whatever they're limerent on. It could also be like maybe a hormonal, oh my goodness, excuse me, let me rephrase, hormonal imbalance, or just something where you're just not balanced mentally and it's irregular, that can contribute to those intense feelings associated with limerence. Now, through my research, it also said that it could be social and cultural influences. I don't fully understand that, but it could be like social and cultural like factors, like media portrayals of romantic love. And maybe they really believe that, like chick flicks or something, which I personally do not enjoy because I feel like it's just so unrealistic. And it's just not how relationships work most of the time. Now, for people who do experience that, kudos to you. I'm happy for you. But I haven't experienced that. I don't know many people who have, if any. And it's just not realistic. But I feel like the major contributing factor is unmet emotional needs. This is someone who has unmet emotional needs, in particular to maybe their early childhood and their caregivers relationships that they have with their parents or whoever raised them, their guardian, and they're more affected by limerence. Like they're seeking this emotional fulfillment in other relationships that, to be quite frank, will just never happen. But, you know, it, again, like I mentioned before, it's something that started in childhood and they've carried it into adulthood. And now you have to learn how to overcome that and let that go, because it's not healthy. Limerence it's an unhealthy attachment, and it becomes a pattern. And it starts early from those relationships with your parents or your caregiver relationships. So it's a combination of psychological, biological, and environmental factors. So I feel like we've definitely clearly established what it is and talked about a little bit of how to overcome it. But I feel like you need to get really busy. Like sit down and fill out your calendar once a month, everything that you need to get done. Do a brain dump on a sheet of paper. I prefer writing things down. I know that we're in the digital age, but I feel like you need to write things down. That's when it sticks to me more, and I'll remember things more if I write it down versus putting it in my notes on my phone or my iPad. It's just not the same. It's helpful, and I do go back and look at my notes, but it's just not the same. So I would recommend that you do that. You sit down and do your calendar once a month, and you plug in all those things you need to do, those things that you want to do, that you've had on your to-do list that you haven't got done yet, as well as sitting down and going over your weekly goals. It's a new week. You've got new goals. You've got new things you're trying to challenge and get done. Give yourself deadlines. And if you're following my platform, whether it's on TikTok, YouTube, or listening to my podcast, you know that I talk about time blocking very often. So you need to time block. I like to do it by the week. I do change it by the day occasionally, but it's best to do it daily. Especially if you kind of like your priorities kind of change, but you just have this massive to-do list and you just plug it in as you can. But start time blocking. Get really, really busy. Start new hobbies. Get into your hobbies. And stop thinking about those fantasies that will never come true. They're never going to come true. And they're not real. And these are obsessive thoughts. And you're constantly thinking about a person you're infatuated with. And you have this like intense longing for this person. I feel like it could be someone also who's limerence prone. Could be someone suffering from anxiety or depression, because you can have both. um, and compulsive disorders or behaviors, I should say. So maybe bipolar or, you're just like dealing with something. It can derive from many, many things, but definitely do your research and read on that subject. Like it's very enlightening. And when it came across my YouTube page from the childhood crappy fairy or crappy childhood fairy, I was like, this is so interesting. Like I just, I didn't know that this was a thing, but I suffered from it and I didn't understand what it was and I didn't know why it was happening and I wanted it to stop. And I kept researching and researching until I found information on it. I learned how to understand what limerence is and discovered how to overcome it. So if you find yourself consumed by obsessive thoughts and fantasies about someone that you're interested in romantically, you're probably experiencing limerence. And it's complex, it's a complex emotional state. It can be an obsessive longing for someone and manifesting through intrusive thoughts and fantasies. But don't lose hope. You're not alone. A lot of people suffer from that and you can overcome it. You just have to catch yourself doing that and figure out what you're going to do, find tools to help you overcome it and to stop doing it. Another thing to mention is that limerence can mimic obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. So this is the first article that I found that did actually mention that it is a form of OCD. Psych Central is a great website to check out. But it's someone who has an obsessive and compulsive nature. And they work to resolve certain feelings and different feelings of uncertainty through compulsions while in limerence. So uncertainty can fuel this infatuation with a person. Some mental health conditions could also be like, that are prone to limerence could be borderline personality disorder, BPD, as some people may know it by. It can intensify or increase the frequency of limerence. So it could be one or two of those things. It could be several things. It could be, as we discussed, from unresolved trauma in your childhood, and it can be OCD. It can also be BPD, borderline personality disorder. But nonetheless, you're not alone. This is something you can overcome, and you will. If you're listening to this episode, this podcast, that is a step. I would definitely recommend that you see a psychiatrist and get diagnosed. You can also go to therapy consistently and see if maybe you need medication. I know that a lot of people are not pro medication, but I feel like a lot of people should be, because some of us are chemically imbalanced and you simply can't help it. It's not your fault. And it's no different than someone who is suffering from diabetes or hypertension, and they need medicine to stay healthy and essentially to stay alive. Now, it may not be as extreme as diabetes or hypertension, where you stop taking the medication and, you can get really sick and it gets out of control and it leads to other health problems. But dealing with mental health, it can lead to a lot of traumatic situations and things that didn't have to happen had you seek treatment. So I would highly recommend that you see a psychiatrist, go to your therapy sessions consistently. And if you need medication, take the medication. Don't be ashamed. This is 2024. A lot of people we're finding out, fortunately, we are finding out through a lot of research through the medical industry that a lot of things that have been around since the beginning of time, we're just now figuring out what they are. We're figuring out what bipolar is, borderline personality disorder, OCD, schizophrenia, so many other things that we just maybe didn't know at the beginning of time. But as we have evolved as people, we figured out like, oh, that's what that is, and that's what's wrong. And we're not perfect. So it's fine. There's nothing wrong with you. Again, it's not your fault. So definitely seek treatment for that. And keep up the good work. Life is a journey. We constantly have to overcome one mountain to the next. So don't lose hope. Don't feel despair. Just talk to someone that you trust about it and seek help. Now, I know that everyone on social media is talking about BetterHelp. BetterHelp for me personally was horrible. I did not have a great experience with them. So I would recommend Brightside. I am not sponsored by them, but that is a great platform to find a psychiatrist and a provider who can help you. Guys, thank you so much for listening. I missed this. I love doing my podcast, and you will hear from me a lot more. And I will talk to you guys in the next episode. Bye.